This is another planning period with Wesley and Teach This Teacher, and today we're going to be talking about SS8H9, describing Georgia's role in World War II. This is fresh off of SS8H8, where students were talking about World War I and the Great Depression. So hopefully they understand that between the Great Depression, the Great Depression led us up to World War II. And we're going to start off maybe with a vocabulary word for students. And that vocabulary word, I would just put it up on the board, isolationism. And ask them, what does this word mean? You're probably going to get very few responses. Then ask students, what parts of words do you see? Hopefully they'll say isolate or ism. And so we're going to explore what this word means. Once students understand what isolationism is, you're going to ask them, why would Americans be isolationist? So now we're going to change that word, that ending of that word, and say, now, why would we have been isolationist? And hopefully their rich discussion will bring them to the fact that Americans had lost so many lives during the First World War. Back in the previous standard, they learned that thousands of Georgians died in Georgia's contribution to the war, and they didn't want to get into another war. So hopefully those are the things that your discussion would bring up. So you're going to let them know that even though the United States tried to stay isolated out of the war, they were involved financially. They were financing the Allied powers through something called the Lend-Lease Act, where we sent billions of dollars in supplies to the United Kingdom, France, Soviet Union, and China to help them defeat the Axis powers. For 4 years, the United States continued to supply these countries by lending them weapons and leasing money to fund this war. This led to Japan, who was allied with the Axis powers, Germany. This led them to strike the United States at Pearl Harbor in December 7, 1941. This attack students are probably most likely familiar with. You could still, though, show a lot of document-based, primary source documents, videos, radio clips, newspaper articles, many of which I have in my resources that I sell on Teach This Teacher down in the links. So this attack on Pearl Harbor is what caused many Americans to now support a war. And indeed, on December 8th, 1941, in a moving speech, President Roosevelt did declare war. Congress approved. He called it a day that will live in infamy. I'll see if I can find a link to that speech, and you can play parts of it down in the notes for this video. So the key vocabulary word from element A is Lend-Lease Act, Pearl Harbor, World War II. Moving on to element B, describe the role of Georgia by evaluating the purpose and economic impact of three things: Bell Bomber Plant, military bases, and shipyards. Those are the big three things that we're going to explore in element B. How did Georgia help the war efforts through those three things? So the key word here is evaluate the purpose and impact. All right, so students are going to hopefully evaluate them as effective, that these were effective methods to help win the war. And that is the point you want to get them to, that they can say and know why these were effective. So the Bell Bomber Plant was in Marietta, Georgia, and it produced B-29 bombers. Your average 8th grade student does not know what a B-29 bomber is, so this will be a great place to show a picture of it. In the end, it produced over 650 of these bombers, and they were later used not only in World War II, but in the Korean War as well. The economic impact, remember the standard says the purpose and the economic impact. Economic impact is that over 30,000 people, mostly from Georgia, were employed in this Bell Bomber Plant. So you're going to ask students, what do you think those workers, how did them all getting a job in the Bell Bomber Plant affect the economy? What could they do with that money? Buy houses, buy cars, spend it on appliances and on education. So a lot of times we say, oh, it provided them with jobs. And to a student who's never had a job, they don't really understand what that means. That stimulates the economy through all these many ways. So help them explore that. This was one of the largest plants ever built in the Deep South because remember, we were agricultural based. So now people have an opportunity to get different types of jobs. Though the plant closed in 1951, it was bought by Lockheed Martin. Students won't know who that is, but just let them know that it's a huge, probably Fortune 500 or maybe even in the top 100 companies, and it still employs Georgians today. In addition to that, we were able to expand and to build our military bases here, like Dobbins Air Force Base, and all of the jobs that Air Force Base still brings to Georgia today. You don't have to be in the military to work on an Air Force Base. And so thousands of people are employed because this Bell Bomber plant and it got bought by Lockheed Martin. Lockheed Martin makes all the things for aircraft. And so it's still providing jobs and millions of dollars into our state economy. So the second thing after Bell Bomber plant that we were supposed to look at in the element was military bases. They should remember from the previous standard that Georgia had the most military bases in World War I of any state. Well, in World War II, these military bases grew and that employed more and more people. For example, Fort Benning near Columbus, Georgia, was the largest military base and viewed as the best infantry facility during the war. All right. So again, ask them, what do you think that did for the local economy near Columbus? If you teach near the Columbus and in those surrounding counties, ask them how many people they know that are connected or employed by the military. For example, I know a family who they build homes or buildings on the military base, and they have a company where they employ 20, 30 construction workers. Then the third part of that standard is Liberty ships. They need to, this is a throwback to our geography standard, ask them where on Georgia's geography, where on the coast would Liberty ships be built and shipped out to help the war effort. And hopefully they know that the answer would probably be, hopefully they'll say Savannah. Fewer of them might say Brunswick. So that's basically that part of the standard, is that Liberty ships were built. Many times these bomber planes and these ships were built by women. Ask students why. Notice that I'm telling you to ask them questions to get them thinking. That gets them engaged in the lesson. Ask them, why would women be used to do this? And hopefully they'll come to the conclusion that the men were actually shipped out for the war, and a lot of these jobs were filled by women. Now, something that's interesting and certainly not in the standard that I think you should share with students is that these women, as soon as the men came back from war, they were not allowed to keep their newfound freedom in the workforce, but they were put back into the homes and told to go back to their roles. And men took those places, and women were not out of the homes in a great number again until the 1950s. And so a lot of times students think, oh, women came to work during World War II and it revolutionized, and they've been working in the workforce ever since in large numbers, and that's just not true. So 99 Liberty ships were built in just 2 years out of Brunswick specifically, boosting, of course, the local economy in those coastal areas. So now we'll move to element C. Element C is different from element A and B in the sense that it's still talking about World War II, but it's different in the sense it's talking about two individual people. Richard B. Russell Jr. and Carl Vinson are two congressmen from Georgia who contributed greatly to Georgia's war effort. Richard B. Russell in the United States Senate and Carl Vinson in the United States House. I have two great resources called Do You Know Carl Vinson? Do You Know Richard B. Russell? They're informational texts, and they come with formative quizzes to give a little biographical information on these two men. So Richard B. Russell is a graduate of UGA, Go Dogs, born in Winder, Georgia, for those of you that are in that area, and students know where Winder is. And at the age of 23, he was the youngest person ever elected to the Georgia General Assembly. So if you have already covered the government standards, this would be a spiral review. What is the Georgia General Assembly? Hopefully students will know it's like the House. And from there, he became governor. Also the youngest governor in the 20th century of any state. And from there, he became a senator in Washington, D.C. He helped win World War II through his work on the Appropriations Committee in the Senate. So have students just know that he made a lot of laws and he worked really hard for funding. And that's what the Appropriations Committee is responsible for. And he helped the U.S. prepare for World War II before the United States were ever in the war. Have students understand that if you wait until you've declared war to start building up your military, you've waited too late. And he was, if you will, visionary in that way. He is influential in bringing over and maintaining 15 military bases in the state. And he also brought other research facilities like the Center for Disease Control, the CDC. Students might have a connection in their schema with that through COVID and the work that the CDC did. So Richard B. Russell is responsible for bringing the CDC to Atlanta. However, I love to tell the full story of history, and students should understand that he also, Senator Russell, was a segregationist, and historians believe that this may have even kept him from becoming president one day, per the teacher notes on the Georgia Department of Education. Carl Vinson was in the House of Representatives for 51 years, an absolute record. And one of his quotes is this: "The most expensive thing in the world is a cheap army and navy." And I want you to take my inquiry-based approach and turn that into an engaging discussion. How would you do that? I would suggest that you put that quote on the board and ask students to explain it. How is the most expensive thing in the world a cheap army and navy when it takes billions of dollars to fund it? Fund it. Hopefully students will understand that what he's saying is if you have a cheap army and a cheap navy, you're going to pay the price later. So his nickname is the father of the two-ocean navy. He was born in Baldwin County, which is Milledgeville. For those of you that are around there, please make that connection for students. And after graduating from Mercer University, he was an attorney. And then he went to the General Assembly in 1908 and was later elected to the U.S. House of Representatives. He also was encouraging the United States to build up its military, but it was during the isolationist period. And we've talked to our students, remember, from earlier in this planning period about what an isolationist period is. So you're going to tell them that he had to fight hard because people were not for building the military because they were for staying out of wars. But again, because of his vision, we were more prepared for the World War II. And people were very appreciative of his contributions in bringing hard-earned dollars to Georgia to invest in our military bases. Through his work, he pushed through Congress 2 bills that expanded the Navy, that funded 10,000 planes, 16,000 pilots were trained on this bill, and 20 Air Force bases were constructed because of his support for these bills and his advocacy. Because of his work, he earned the Presidential Medal of Freedom, and you can show students a picture of the U.S. nuclear-powered aircraft carrier that's right now named the USS Carl Vinson. Remember the standard says we have to talk about the impact economically that World War II had on Georgia. Over 90% of the workforce on Georgia military installations were civilians. So people that were not in the military, but they got their paycheck from working on these military installations. Over 20,000 jobs were brought to local economies through this time. There's other facts that you can get, but the basics is again that Richard Russell Jr. and Carl Vinson, visionary and forward thinking, helped protect the country during World War II, and we were more prepared for the war, and it brought economic stability and investment into the state. So that's pretty much it for SS8H9, and I think we did this one in a record time. Please check the links for great resources. I have gallery walks that have short biographies of both of these individuals. It has a picture of the USS Carl Vinson, and it teaches this standard very thoroughly, and other great links that are engaging and affordable down in the links. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. It helps this information get out to other people and helps me in my teacherpreneur aspirations. Thanks everyone, and I will see you on the next planning period with Mr. Glosson. This is Teach This Teacher. Bye.